Imagine a story so incredible it sounds like fiction. The tale of a Native American youth, kidnapped and taken across the ocean to the heart of a global empire. A young man who would return home not as a puppet but as a warrior chief, a brilliant tactician who would challenge two of the world's greatest powers and come tantalizingly close to changing the course of American history. This is the story of Opechancanough, one of the most formidable yet forgotten leaders in early America. Our story begins in the summer of 1561, along the shores of what we now call the Chesapeake Bay. Spanish explorers abduct a young man from the Powhatan people. His name, as the Spanish recorded it, was Paquiquinho. This wasn't an unusual practice. The Spanish often took young indigenous people to train as interpreters, hoping they could lead them to rumored caches of gold and silver. But Paquiquinho was different. He was reputed to be the brother of the great chief Powhatan, and he was exceptionally intelligent. He was transported across the Atlantic to the royal court of Spain, a world away from the forests and rivers of his homeland. He stood before King Philip II, a deeply religious ruler of a vast and powerful empire. The king saw in this young man a powerful tool. He believed Paquiquinho could be the key to establishing a Catholic mission in the Chesapeake, a foothold for Spanish colonization beyond the territories in Florida. So the Spanish educated him. They baptized him, giving him a new princely name, Don Luis de Velasco. For 9 long years, he lived among them, first in Spain, then in Mexico City and Florida. He learned their language, their customs, and most importantly, their mindset and their strategies. He saw firsthand what Spanish conquest truly meant: the destruction of native cultures, the forced conversion to a new religion, and the loss of ancestral lands. The Spanish thought they were molding a loyal servant of the crown and the church. They were unknowingly training their greatest adversary. In 1570, Don Luis finally got his chance to go home. He was sent back to the Chesapeake with a small group of Jesuit missionaries. Their mission was to convert his people and pave the way for a new Spanish colony. Filled with unshakable faith in his piety, the missionaries allowed Don Luis to lead them deep into the wilderness, far from the safety of any armed support. It was a fatal mistake. They had been completely deceived. Within 6 months, the man they knew as Don Luis, the man his people knew as Paquiquinho, led a war party against the mission. All 8 Jesuits were killed. The mission was utterly destroyed. With this single, decisive act, he shattered Spain's ambitions for the Chesapeake Bay. He knew that allowing the Jesuits to establish even a small beachhead would have been the beginning of the end. Soldiers and settlers would follow, and his people would be displaced and destroyed. He chose to fight. Returning to his people, Paquiquinho, now known as Opechancanough, was a changed man. He was one of a very select few Native Americans who had seen the European world from the inside and returned. He understood the scale of the threat in a way no one else could. This unique knowledge likely spurred his brother, Chief Powhatan, to accelerate the expansion of his chiefdom. Over the next few decades, they unified more than 30 different tribal groups into a powerful confederacy called Seneca, stretching across coastal Virginia. They were preparing for the inevitable. And the inevitable arrived in May of 1607. 104 Englishmen landed on the banks of the James River and established a settlement they called Jamestown. At first, relations were tense but manageable. But as more and more English settlers arrived, including women and children, the situation deteriorated. The English needed more land, more resources, and their presence became an ever-growing intrusion. Hostilities soon erupted into the First English-Powhatan War, a brutal conflict that raged for 5 years. By 1614, the English had established a firm grip along the James River, and an aging Chief Powhatan was effectively sidelined. Power shifted to his formidable war chief, Opechancanough. The English had no idea that this charismatic leader was the same man who, decades earlier, had systematically wiped out the Spanish mission. Opechancanough learned from his brother's direct confrontations. He knew he couldn't beat the English in pitched battles against their muskets and cannons. So he changed tactics. He adopted a strategy of deception, a long game of patience and misdirection he had perhaps learned from his time in the Spanish court. He approached the English with words of peace. He reassured them of his good intentions, even hinting that his people might be willing to convert to Protestantism. For years, he played the part of the friendly chief. He duped the colony's leaders and lulled the settlers into a false sense of security. Powhatan warriors became a common sight in English settlements, trading goods, borrowing tools, and sharing meals. The English believed peace had finally come. All the while, Opechancanough was secretly forging alliances, uniting warriors from across the Confederacy, and meticulously planning one of the most devastating surprise attacks in American history. The day came on a chilly March morning in 1622. As the sun rose, groups of Powhatan warriors gathered silently in the woods near the scattered English settlements. At a prearranged signal, they began walking calmly towards the settlers' homes. Nothing seemed out of the ordinary. These were familiar faces, trading partners, neighbors. Then, at about 8 in the morning, the signal was given. The friendly visitors turned into an avenging force. Chaos erupted simultaneously all along the James River. Warriors fell upon the English with shocking violence. Using the settlers' own tools and weapons against them, they spared no one. More warriors poured out of the woods to join the fight, burning houses, slaughtering livestock, and finishing off any survivors. The scene was one of utter pandemonium. Flames consumed plantations. Smoke billowed into the sky. The air was filled with the screams of the dying, the shouts of warriors, and the crack of musket fire. The attack was so sudden, so perfectly executed, that most settlers never saw it coming. On that single day, nearly 350 Englishmen, women, and children were killed, almost a third of the entire colonial population. Opechancanoug's goal wasn't to win in a single day. He followed up the initial massacre with relentless raids, destroying crops and cutting off food supplies. Panic seized the colony. One planter wrote, "The last massacre killed all our country." They'd burst the heart of all the rest. Settlers abandoned their homes, fleeing to a few fortified locations. The colonial leaders even considered abandoning Virginia altogether. Opechancanoug's strategy was working. He sent messengers to other tribes, boasting that soon there should not be an Englishman in all their countries. He believed he could starve them out, demoralize them, and force them to flee back across the ocean. But ultimately, his grand strategy failed. He had underestimated the sheer stubbornness and resources of the English Empire. Despite the devastating losses from war, famine, and disease, the ships kept coming, bringing wave after wave of new settlers. Opechancanough simply did not have the numbers to fight a war of attrition against an enemy with a seemingly endless supply of reinforcements. Within a few years, the English had recovered and began expanding once more, pushing relentlessly into native lands. But Opechancanough never gave up. 2 decades later, in the 1640s, driven by bitterness and despair, the old chief, now nearly 100 years old, inspired one last uprising. He led another generation of warriors against the invaders, killing around 500 settlers before he was finally captured. He was taken to Jamestown, the very heart of the colony he had fought for so long to destroy. There, the legendary warrior chief, ancient and frail, was ignominiously shot in the back by one of his guards and died. Today, when we think of great Native American leaders, names like Sitting Bull or Tecumseh come to mind. But Opechancanoug's story is just as, if not more, extraordinary. It was he who single-handedly halted Spanish expansion on the East Coast. And it was he who resisted the English in Virginia for nearly half a century, coming closer than anyone to expelling them from the continent. His life was an epic battle against 2 of Europe's mightiest empires. Opechancanough was, without a doubt, one of the greatest military strategists in all of American history, and it's time his story was told. Thanks for watching. If you found this story as fascinating as I did, be sure to like this video and subscribe for more hidden histories. See you next time.